guys, it's Canadian. Welcome to another first impressions video on the player test server here. This is for the upcoming expansion, which is released in February at some point. Today I'm going to cover the Telekinetic Sage. So it seems like they got some interesting things going on. I'm pretty happy with how things are looking. I think they're going to be a super mobile DPS spec, and they are losing some self-healing, so that's a little disappointing there. So they're going to be really leaning on their damage reduction and mobility to keep them alive now. So it's a little on the downside, but overall I think they're going to be in a good spot. I think there's a lot of good shit going on. So the right column here, these are the passives. They seem to be unchanged from 6.0, so I didn't notice anything. But just to talk about the talent tree here, so you're level 23 here, you get Force Armor's got a little bit buffed to absorb some extra damage, so that's kind of nice, and you get some damage reduction as part of that as well. And the other thing you get at 23 here is your Telekinetic Wave. So your first choice in the game is at 27. You get different abilities here that can modify your Telekinetic Wave in unique ways here, so you can get some kind of unique buff. So your first choice to talk about, Dormant Tremors. So Telekinetic Wave will apply this like Tremors debuff to everything it hits. Now Telekinetic Wave has a huge radius, so it hits basically everything. You shouldn't have too much trouble getting Tremors on just about everything. And when you use your first Force Quake, the damage is actually really good. So if you were looking at some kind of option to supplement your AoE damage, this would actually be a really good pick. If it's a good pick for PvP though, yeah, I don't think so. I mean, the damage is good. Like, I was happy with it, but I don't know if it would be worth using. You're not spamming Force Quake all that often in PvP, really. Not if the goal is to try to kill people. Usually, it's the burst damage that's probably going to drop people before your first Quake ever would. So your next choice here, Mysteries of the Force. Dealing damage with Telekinetic Wave builds stacks of Mysteries of the Force. Now this Mysteries of the Force buff that you can stack on yourself, it does not last very long. Like, you have to be popping Telekinetic Wave, like the proc for it, and then using Telekinetic Wave basically every time it's up, like the second it's up. There is no forgiveness for not using Telekinetic Wave on cooldown, just because if you don't do it, the buff falls off. Now the extra healing that you're supposed to get on Force Bend for this one here, I don't know if this talent is just broken or if the amount of extra healing you get from it is just so minimal. I didn't notice, but it seemed to me like the healing you got on this one was just complete garbage. So I think this one probably is going to seem, I hope it gets some kind of numbers tweak here, because it just seems a little low. And now the cool thing about this is that it does reduce the cooldown on Force Bend when you use your Telekinetic Wave. It seems to us about reducing it by like 4 seconds every time you use Telekinetic Wave, so that's actually pretty cool. And this Mysteries of the Force talent you can actually pair with another utility down in the tree here later on, so you get a little more bang for your buck on this talent here. So I think as it is, if this were to go live, you would never pick this because you needed like a little extra healing. The only reason to really take this utility is because it's helping you reduce the cooldown of your Force Bend, which is like a really strong cooldown. It's going to be a lot more important now for Telekinetic Sages because you're losing some self-healing buffs, and yeah. So yeah, it's something to really consider. So Power of the Force here, this is something new they're introducing to 7.0. So this is changing Telekinetic Wave into, it's replacing it altogether with this Power of the Force ability. So it's focusing all the damage into single target. So on its own, if you compare the single target damage, Power of the Force is the clear-cut winner. But the tooltip on this one, it's a little wonky. I think the wording is definitely going to have to change at this point. I mean, this is like testing server here, but it would sound like reading this, you know, that it says all affected targets, and it's plural, but really all the root and the snare component and the overwhelmed debuff that the target takes, all of this is single target. None of this is AoE. So if you use Power of the Force now, like if you use Telekinetic Wave, you get that cleave effect, so everybody takes damage, and then everybody gets rooted, everybody gets snared, everybody takes that overwhelmed debuff. So Telekinetic Wave is really strong, but with Power of the Force, only if you use this in a crowd, only one person is snared and rooted and all that. So Yeah, that's a really big price to pay in PvP, especially when Telekinetic Wave is hitting a bunch of people. It's like, do you really want to do like a little bit of extra single target damage? That's kind of a tough call to make. I mean, the damage was like I was happy with it, but oof, losing that cleave damage, I didn't. It didn't feel good. I think I'd rather not use Power of the Force, to be honest, because I felt Telekinetic Wave, the cleave was just so much better. It was worth doing perhaps maybe a little less single target damage, but like the utility and the cleave damage was so much more worth it. But I think Power of the Force definitely has a place, and I could be mistaken. But yeah, my gut reaction on this one is that I think Telekinetic Wave is just probably a little better. So I think I'd probably start rolling with Mysteries of the Force as my kind of first go-to here, and then I can play with the others. But yeah, I think that Mysteries of the Force is probably one of my best in tier. So for the level 35 tier here, there's a couple options to talk about that are interesting. First one up, Clarity. So your project deals bonus damage to slow targets and increases your movement speed by 20%. So you're chucking like snares out all the time with like your Telekinetic Wave, and you've also got Telekinetic Burst as well. It can apply a snare. So that you're always going to have a snare on the target. So project dealing a little extra damage on paper sounds really good, but when I started testing this out, I thought the damage was like not noticeable. It was so low that it wasn't worth taking just for the damage here. So yeah, this felt like a really bad pick. Now the 20% movement speed buff when you're in combat, it didn't feel that strong, and the buff I think only lasted like a second and a half or something like that. So the movement speed buff, it wasn't much. It wasn't really worth taking, I thought. It was just so not impactful at all, and the damage wasn't anything great either. This talent felt kind of not good. I wouldn't think it would go live as it is. I think this could probably use some balance changes here, but if it does go live like it is, this one is just complete trash. Next one here, Forceful Retribution. So this was a little confusing on why you would want to take this here. It's basically just a cleave. You can spam this ability. The damage didn't seem terrible, and it would proc your Telekinetic Wave as well. So you already have such a great option in using Dormant Tremors if you really needed to do extra AoE. In conjunction working with Telekinetic Wave. Like, those two talents seem so strong for AoE that you really didn't need Forceful Retribution, to be honest. Like, it was just one extra thing that I felt was unnecessary. And, obviously, like, with Force Quake, the AoE size is so huge that, yeah, it's just so good. I didn't feel like I needed that. It would just be maybe something you could use as a filler instead of like Telekinetic Burst. Okay, like even if you want to use it as a replacement for Telekinetic Burst because they do share the same activation time. But yeah, you get damage reduction. It applies a snare on Telekinetic Burst, so that's a lot to give up in PvP just to do a bit of extra cleave. And Telekinetic doesn't really suffer a cleave problem because Telekinetic Wave is so good. Yeah, I can't see a place for this one, to be honest, but I mean, you can't argue that maybe the damage numbers might be a little better, but yeah, I don't know how effective it will be. Next one is Cloud Mine. So this is no longer baseline for your Sage, unfortunately. So if you want to have that damage reduction for 6 seconds here, this is a good way to get it back. It's pretty strong for PvP, just being a little tanky in those windows where you kind of need it. And it seems we're not going to have access to some of the really good self-healing utilities that we could get in 6.0. So you're going to be leaning on damage reduction a lot more in that expansion, I think, for what I'm seeing so far. So I think Cloud Mine's going to be a lot more compelling pick for PvP here. Out of your other choices, I don't see really good options. Now, at 43 here, this is going to be some kind of option that's going to modify your turbulence. So I think for most people, off balance here is going to be the good pick for PvP, just because having a 2-second root on your turbulence is super strong. Now, every class in the game seems to, for the expansion, is going to be looking at some kind of mobility decrease, or they won't be able to cleanse roots as often. So increasing the amount of roots in PvP, so having this is going to be really strong. I think one of the benefits right now with roots is they don't contribute to adding resolve. So if you have, like in theory, if you had every ability apply a root, you could permanently lock someone down without adding any resolve to their bar, which I know sounds broken, but telekinetic sages are going to have two sources of roots. They're going to have their telekinetic wave, or if power of the force, if you go with that, they'll be applying roots, and your off balance utility will apply a root with turbulence. So those are going to be. It's not spammable, but they're up a lot. They're pretty frequent. I think for some classes where they don't have a root breaker anymore, that's going to be going to make life hell with a class that's super mobile and just chucking roots out there like it's nobody's business. I think this is going to be a really strong pick. I think I can't see any Sage picking anything else other than this. But you have a couple other choices, and next one, talk about mental disparity. So this deals damage with every time you do turbulence, it just gives you a tick of weakened mind. Now, I mean, weakened mind is a good dot, but with just like one extra tick out of it, it's not that much, to be honest. Is it worth giving up the 2-second root? Hell no. So, yeah, maybe a PvE thing where the damage might be a little better, and there could be some math involved on that one, but for PvP, just the root is so solid. It's not worth taking this mental disparity over it. Okay, so last one, incoming turbulence. So this increases telekinetic wave damage by 5% after you use turbulence, which it's good. It's not nothing, but again, the root component to turbulence is just so strong. It's at 5%. It has to be a lot higher than that before I'm going to give up that root. That's for sure. So next here to talk about is kind of more of a survivability choice, to be honest, just because one option here is force empowerment, and this is a long 5-minute cooldown, and it's basically more or less for operations, not so much PvP. You could make an argument for taking it in PvP though, like maybe in ranked arenas or possibly some war zones if you want to YOLO a bit, but I think most people would find better mileage, to be honest, out of the other two choices. The first one I'll talk about, Defensive Blast. I'm leaning towards this one's probably the better choice here, but the other one's a compelling one too. So what it does is every time you use Turbulence, it gives you a buff that reduces your damage reduction by 5%, and that lasts 18 seconds. And because your Turbulence is up like every 9 seconds roughly, that shouldn't be any problem to maintain. That should be really easy. That's always going to be there for you. It's just a static damage reduction. And again, you're losing self-healing a little bit, some of the talents that would increase your healing, so you don't have access to those anymore. So any way you can kind of like absorb damage somehow now is valuable. So that damage reduction is going to be really good. Okay, next up, Enhanced Forced Armor. This increases all healing received by 5% and increases damage absorbed by your forced armor by 10%. So if you want to get a little bit of extra healing back, this would be a good pick. So that's kind of a compelling choice. It's a big argument. Is like, do you want to have increased healing on yourself, or do you want to have like a flat damage reduction boost? So you can make an argument, I guess, for either one. I'm kind of leaning towards the damage reduction being slightly better. So the level 60 tier here, I don't think anyone's going to really argue it, but I think Force Ability is going to be the best one for PvP without a doubt. Turbulence on the move is just so good. It's what makes the spec what it is, the mobile absolute monster. So the other choices you got here, Resistance, so just a passive 3% damage reduction. So it's not bad, having a lot of damage reduction, but definitely not worth having an extra 3% just to become immobile. Turbulence on the move is just way better than 3% damage reduction. The other choice here, Telekinetic Defense. So yeah, your Zap Bubble, if you want to use it, you have to give up Turbulence on the move, which is not worth it. This doesn't provide enough damage, I think, to give that up for the survivability and mobility that it gives you, having Turbulence on the move. So yeah, not something you can pick anymore, but for some reason it's there if you need it. Now the next tier, for some people this one might kind cut kind of deep here. I think most Telekinetic Sages, though, are going to be pretty happy with just going with Metaphysical Alacrity here, just because your mental alacrity is going to be up a lot more often. So, and it's such an important cooldown for you. So I think most people are going to want to go with this, and it provides you more mobility and lots of goodies in this one. So I think that for PvP, this is probably the most compelling pick. Now, the next one to talk about, though, Valorous Spirit. So you can pair this utility with the other one earlier in the tree if you really kind of want to lean on a healing kind of reset build here, I guess. But it's pretty good. It gives you a little bit of damage reduction on a fairly short cooldown. And if you pair that with Blackout, you'll have a couple of cooldowns that'll make you fairly tanky for short windows there. So it's not, there's an argument, I guess, for taking it if you want to be a lot more tanky, but not worth giving up mobility, though, from Metaphysical Alacrity. But yeah, you can make an argument for taking this talent. And also, when it reduces the cooldown on Force Men by 5 seconds as well, it means that if you do take that Mysteries of the Force talent, and it's reducing your cooldown even more every time you use Telekinetic Blitz, it just means that you have a pretty short cooldown. So it's kind of cool. And last talent here, your Kinetic Collapse. So this is the Force Bubble that everybody loves. Just everybody hugs you, and then everybody's blinded. I fucking hate this thing, man, when I have to play against it. But yeah, now it's something you got to pick. But yeah, you got your choice between your AoE CC, some tankiness, or mobility. So that, yeah, you got some different choices here, but yeah, I think mobility is probably the best. So the level 73 tier here, yeah, this kind of harder. Now, Telekinetic Blitz here, this is one of your choices, and I think it really struggled to find a home in 6.0. Like, it was there, but you didn't really need to use it, to be honest. Maybe unless you were using a tactical. This is just something that if you took it off your bar, like, it would be totally fine. You wouldn't miss it at all. But if you want it back for some reason, it's an option. Whether it's better than your other option for PvP, not a chance. But maybe in PvE, you might think of some reason to take this. So with the expansion coming up here, Force Lift is no longer baseline. You do get to keep your single target stun, which between the two, I'm a little happier about maintaining the stun, because that's if you need a cooldown that's gonna save your ass, the stun's probably gonna help a lot more. But the good thing is Force Lift is now instant cast if you do pick it, so you get that function back. But you lost access to that utility that if somebody broke the damage on, or if you broke your own Force Lift with damage, it would cause the person to get a stun for 2 seconds. That was really good, but you don't have that anymore. So this is just a straight soft CC for 8 seconds. So yeah, it's nice to get back. I think it's a really good choice for PvP, to be honest. And the other choice you have that's also useful for PvP is Phase Walk. So that's no longer baseline as well. This was actually a really cool cooldown you could use. It would definitely get you out of jail in a lot of really bad situations, so it's a really good cooldown. You could do some pretty clever stuff with it, but between it and Force Lift, I think Force Lift might be a little better, just because you still have Bubble to get you out of jail if you need to, and you have access to soft CC as well. So yeah, you can set up some kills, I think, if you have a little extra CC, but it's kind of a hard choice because, yeah, Phase Walk was also really good. I'll play around with both, but I think right now my gut instinct is to say keep Force Lift, and I'll see how things go. And last tier here to talk about, Egress is probably going to be the default for everybody, just because it cleanses roots and snares, all that kind of nasty shit, and makes you immune to them. And if you're pairing it with Metaphysical Alacrity, which I think most people will, the Egress talent is just so strong. So I think that's going to be the choice here for everybody. Your other option here, Confound. So anything affected by your weakened mind is slowed by 30%, and that's a pretty long snare because that's not difficult to keep up. So the only thing with this is that you're always applying snares with your Telekinetic Wave, and your Telekinetic Burst has a snare component to it as well. So you have passive ways of putting a snare on people that this really doesn't become a necessary utility. You don't really need it. So you can play without this one for sure. Alright, so last one, Mind Ward here. So this would just give you that periodic damage reduction here. So yeah, you kind of miss out on this one because I think egress is just so much more compelling, but it's there if you need it. I think most people will probably prefer egress though for PvP. That's just so good. So that's basically it for the talent tree here. My initial reaction here is to say that this is going to be a super mobile DPS here, and all the roots I think are really going to cause problems. I am a little worried about how the self-healing is going to go here, because you're missing out on probably to get the mobile tanky setup here, is you're going to miss out on the passives in 6.0 that would use to increase your healing. Such as like just like passive increased healing. You also had that utility for bubble that would just passively give you health back just as long as bubble was on you. That thing was so strong. So you lose access to that. So you're gonna have a lot more downtime. You're gonna have moments where you'll be getting low on health, and you'll have to stop doing DPS and maybe just go around a corner, heal yourself up, pick yourself back up, and then get back in the fight. You're gonna have to stop more often, I think. So well, yeah, we'll see how things go, but and we'll see how the damage numbers look at 80 here, because it's difficult to say right now on the test server how things are gonna shape up. What it's going to look like in a couple months too. But if the damage is good, I think Telekinetic Sages are going to be a fucking monster in PvP, to be honest. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, that's it for this video, guys. I don't think I'll be covering the other two specs for Sages here, Seer, the healer spec, and Balance, just because they're specs I don't play at all. Is to be honest, so I don't feel I should be talking about them. I really don't know how they work at all. So yeah, Telekinetic Sage is just basically my my guilty pleasure. It's such a fun spec. I love it. The spell abilities look so visceral. Like the Hadouken style abilities. I just love everything about it. It's pretty fun. But yeah, maybe in the next couple of videos, guys, I'll go back to my Commando and Scoundrel here and cover some of the other specs I haven't touched on yet. So see you in the next one, guys.